But we thought it would be a good idea and appropriate, seeing this Easter was 30 years since she died, for us to have a weekend where we just had the opportunity to collect a few photos and share a few stories. And so that's what the weekend's about. Kia ora te whanau, ko Mataruahau te maunga, ko Tutaikuri te awa, no Ahewere ahau, ko Kirikiri roa toku ingoa. No, not toku inga, tika inga, gotta get it right. Ko Rau te whanau, ko Thomas toku tipuna, ko Don Matua, ko Irene Row, ko Gus Mati atua me te wahi, ngaro tātou, e tiaki e manaki, ngā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thought we should have a little bit of Aotearoa New Zealand to recognise Mum's heritage, seeing we're in the land of cousins. But also we probably should learn to say welcome in Croatian, which is dobrodošli. So that's welcome, and it's kind of like Russian when you say farewell. It's kind of dos videnia, when you finally say farewell. But that should also recognise one's heritage. This came about on the way home from Liz McLagan's funeral, when Rob and Chris and Marg and I were in a car, and this is what old people do, they start getting nostalgic, and we... Sorry, Chris. Yeah. Older people. We were aware that there was a whole lot of stories about Mum that had never been told. There's also a lot of stories that had never been shared. I left home pretty much when I was 16, and I guess I only saw Mum, I've tried to count up about 12 times between then and when she died. So there's whole parts of her life that I wasn't part of. And we've never talked about that stuff. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get all the stories today, but we thought it would be a good idea and appropriate, seeing this Easter was 30 years since she died, for us to have a weekend where we just had the opportunity to collect a few photos and share a few stories. And so that's what the weekend's about. Look, I just think it's always great for the family to get together, but it's good to get together when some of us are still alive. And I'm aware too that there are aspects of Nana Kovacs, so Mum's parents, and Grandad Kovac's life that I know absolutely nothing about. I've never learnt really about what it was like for Nana to come out with her family from England, for Grandad to come out and work in the gum fields and up Northland, and what went through his mind and all of that, and how it shaped him and stuff. And I regret that. So part of the reason was that we would have the weekend so that not just the siblings could get together, but so that the whole family had a chance to maybe catch a little picture of Mum, and that we could honour her. So today is about stories, and those stories can be outrageous, scratchy, I was going to say filthy, but that's not appropriate, about my mother, but just, like they can be the down-to-earth stories. And in doing so we honour Mum, but tomorrow at the graveside our plan is that we will just gather around the grave, and it's a time for anybody just to share a very brief statement of gratitude. So tomorrow's like a gratitude thing. Today it can be, you can bring out all the trauma you like. And Rob and I have some. I particularly want to welcome Kimberly. This will be your first bigger row function. And Kimberly, the general rules are these. Every story okay, divided in half, and it might be something approaching the truth. Okay? You might then want to check with other family members because they will have a completely different version of it, but their story also, they will assure you that their story is completely true. You probably want to take all of those stories with a massive pinch of salt. A couple of stories from me. One is, I have obviously you don't remember much about your family or your parents when you're really young. So my first memories, I have a couple of early memories living in Blenheim, which was when I was about 3 and 4. So after I was born, Mum and Dad moved to Invercargill, then they moved to Blenheim, and from there, Blenheim, they moved to Rotorua, and I started school in Rotorua, and about a month after I started school, maybe I got into trouble or something, they very quickly left. They left Rotorua in a hurry. There's a big story about that too. But my main memory, early memories in Rotorua about Mum, is that a couple of them. Rotorua has some hot pools. They're now called the Polynesian Spa. If you've done the tourist thing, you probably know them. But back in those days, when you walked into the Polynesian pools, it was men on the left, women on the right, because there was no bathing suits. So you just walked in, gear off, and into the pool. And around the pools were all these little changing cubicles. Well, I don't know about the women's thing, but around the men's one, there was just these changing cubicles with curtains. So we would go as a family, and Mum would go off to this mysterious naked women's pool, and we would go into the men's pool. This isn't, and we kind of found that, well, I found it pretty intriguing, just the whole idea of the family separating and Mum going off to the ladies stuff. The fascinating thing is, about 10 years ago, a guy called Peter Wells has written a history of gay New Zealand. And in the history of gay New Zealand, he talks about gay New Zealand in the 40s, 50s and 60s. And as he tells the story, he talks about places that were haunts back in those days. So I think it was, and he said there's a whole chapter devoted to the men's pool in Rotorua in the 50s and 60s, where you could have trysts in the cubicles around the pool. And I just wonder whether Mum had any idea. I don't think so. Yeah. So, and he didn't make any comment about the ladies' pool. But what I do remember in Rotorua is Dad was still playing rugby for a club, and after work or after training in the evening, he would often bring half the team to our house, and it was just this invasion of people. And Mum would just make cheese on toast. So those of you who know the infamous Don cheese on toast, it goes way back. Mousetraps, currently called, but back then it was just cheese on toast. And Mum would be in the kitchen slaving, and Dad would be in the lounge with all of these guys, and Mum would just supply cheese on toast, and it would just go on and on. My other memory of this little house in a suburb called Nongataha in Rotorua is I recall Mum being incredibly happy and funny. And it was a particularly stressful time for Dad's work. He was badly treated by the person he worked for, which is part of the reason we moved to Napier. So it must have been a stressful time. But all I remember in that little house was Mum chasing Dad around the house and tickling him, and him just debilitated, and Mum just laughing her head off as she tickled Dad repeatedly. And that's one of those memories that I have of my mother that I cherish, because it was a time when, as a very impressionable young person, I saw an incredible amount of fun and laughter and game playing and happiness. And for me, that's a precious memory. So that's it from me.
I've got a huge amount of memories of Mum, and they range from some quite traumatic to exactly what Gus was talking about, being really funny. And I was sharing with Gus, and continuing on the Rotorua theme, and I don't know why certain things sit in your memory so sharply, and this isn't anything particularly special, but we went up, when Dad was going to take that job in Rotorua, we'd been living in a town called Blenheim at the top of the South Island in New Zealand, and I remember in my memory, and I have to say that memory is a fickle thing, especially when you're as young as me, that and to continue on the nudity theme, which was raised by my brother, and there's all sorts of issues there, no doubt. Must be a Rotorua thing, because Mum made Gus and I, she took us down to the lake. I think Dad must have gone and been interviewed for the job at the sawmill. He was manager of the sawmill. And we ran around, we went down to the lake. Mum took us down to the lake, and I think David must have been a baby, because he was born in Invercargill, so he must have been very young. But Gus and I were probably 5 and 4 or 5 and 3, something like that. And so I remember us stripping off and jumping into the water and running around, and then we jumped up onto a jetty, and these 2 brown trout raced through underneath us, and for whatever reason that sticks in my mind, and a lot of fun, to pick up on the fun theme with Mum, a lot of fun around that, and just a lot of laughter. And if you look at one of those pictures that comes up, there's me and Gus sitting on a boat with Mum, on an upturned boat, and that's that kind of picture merges into my thinking around this story. But then that goes on to probably what became a love affair of trout fishing as well within our family. And I think one of Mum's great joys, particularly when we lived in Napier, and I'm thinking about Vigor Brown Street, was Dad would take the boys all up to, and Eon was born when we were at Vigor Brown Street, so I'm not sure if you were in these early trips, mate, but... Hey?
The bait.
What?
He was the bait.
Oh, he was the bait, yeah. But we used to go up and fish on the Waikato River above the Hooker Falls. It's one that some of us didn't fall in and drown when I think about it now. And Dad always to take great delight in the fact that we would haul trout out while across the river was the Hooker Lodge, where people were paying, in those days, hundreds. Now you pay thousands of dollars to stay there. And they would be out there with their gear and all dressed up, guys from the States and everywhere that had flown all around the world to catch trout. And us kids would be reeling them in, you know. So anyway, I digress. The thing about all that was that Mum used to, that was the only time she got any peace from 5 boys then, and, well, 6 boys, because Dad never quite grew up. So, and there's that photo I was telling you about, right there. So, yeah. And that sort of family love affair with trout and boats is something that you know, I do remember very fondly. I do have one story about Dad, but it's in a boat, but it's extremely traumatic, and today is about Mum. So, but that picture there is so that's me and Gus and Mum. And when I dug that out a couple of weeks ago, and I had never seen that photo before, and yeah, it was quite nostalgic to do that. So that whole thing about Mum and Dad were complex people. I'm not sure that they were ideally suited, but they somehow made it work. And certainly, as Gus said, they had a lot of happiness for the great bulk of their marriage, so that was good. Yeah. So that's my first story. There'll be others later, after I've had a couple more drinks.
I'd say it most probably traumatised me for life, because I just remember the time that Mark and I raced for the bath, and I ended up in hospital over it, because Dave filled the bath just with hot water. And so obviously I won the race, which I really didn't want to when it came down to it, because I ended up in this bath of hot water that just basically left me with blisters from the waist down, which is every part of your body. But I always crack up about this because I spent the first week in hospital with just a pyjama top on. And what used to really embarrass me, because I had my 6th birthday in hospital, here I am lying on this gurney and your legs are propped up because you've got blisters from your waist down. And who comes in but Mum every day, and she brings all her girlfriends with her, you know, they're all dressed, and so they stand around the bed all chatting, and here I am, this little kid, like, I'm just like,
I think you minimise that story. I mean, my memory of that is that the skin from your waist down peeled right down to your toes, peeled off your body. It was a really traumatic event, and it was boiling water you jumped into. I don't know what was the heated temperature was set at. That's why he's not here for these stories. He knows he's not going to show up in the fight.
But I saw it happen because I was walking down the hall, and I can tell you, Eon jumped in the bath with enthusiasm, and he spasmed out of the bath. He came out in it was like one motion. He landed in the bath, and then his body just went bang, and he landed on the floor of the bathroom. But by then, within 10 seconds, the blisters were forming, and some of them were this high off his leg. These were
The
massive.
skin was peeling off.
Yeah, it was massive.
And Mum was very calm in all that. I remember.
Yeah.
And yet we sat here on a table with a blanket, because in those days nobody was really aware that the best thing for treating burns was cold water. So he was sat on a table with his blanket around him.
Yeah, wrapped him in a blanket.
Wrapped in a blanket and just still burning away.
Now, what do you see screwed up, mate?
I think it's the biggest my ball's ever been.
TMI.
Well, this kind of deteriorated pretty quickly, didn't it?
You started it.
Yeah, well, I did. Well, I just kind of use it as part of, it's a great story. We're part of the progressive gay scene in New Zealand. Young advocates. Just thinking about Rob's comment about Mum was pretty calm. We 5 boys certainly tested Mum. But I'd probably touch on this more tomorrow, but if there's one thing I remember, well, there's many things, but I think about the way she coped with, Dad could be a bit of a force of nature in terms of going one way and then going another way, and all of a sudden off to live in the Solomons, and all of a sudden moving with a job. And Mum was, if I think of one word, it's steadfast. Just that kind of just standing there and doing what was required, so there was packing up all the time, moving, huge shifts, and Mum, and there were, with 5 boys, plenty of traumatic incidents, Dave crashed his bike going down Napier Hill, which most of you know is fairly steep, and Mum and Dad were in the movies, and we were being babysat, and back in those days they prepared a slide which came up on the screen. Could Mr. and Mrs. Row please report to the ticket office? And they got the message that he'd been taken to hospital. But Mum and all of that, panic was not. You never thought of Mum as a panicker. And given the kind of life that the family had and the various places they ended up, that's incredible testimony to her. It was rare. We did push her, and Rob's got a traumatic story about him and me and Dave in that regard, but we pushed her, and she could, maybe she was just smouldering, because if it did come out, it came out pretty well. But that ability not to panic and to just do what was required, I guess, to keep things ticking along, pretty impressive.
Well, she was born in the Depression. She'd been through the Second World War. She was in the sort of auxiliary armed forces. Her brothers all served in the war. One of them died, and quite traumatically, which had a huge impact on the family.
So, and there was that incident during the war where she was a driver and a sort of mechanic who trained, and coming down the hill from, I think, Milton Road. And the vehicle was either a truck or a staff car, the brakes went on it. And Mum managed to keep it under control, ran it through Clive Square, but brought it up without an accident. You know, and so things like that are pretty impressive. You know, there's a lot of other
There's a
people who
uniform
lost
picture
it.
of somewhere there where she's in uniform, and as Mark said, she was a driver mechanic during World War II.
And in fact, she could have actually gone to Egypt during the war. The only thing that stopped her, which was probably good for the rest of us in hindsight, was the fact that her boss wouldn't let her go from where she was working. It was not uncommon in those days for employers to hold a lot of control over your life. A lot of people, like in banks, for example, had to get permission to get married. You know, sort of things you'd think unheard of. And that was all that held her back from actually being in Egypt.
Well, she always cracked me up when I think about the fact that whenever the car broke down or needed any maintenance, Dad would take it into the garage, but the guy would try and say something to Dad, and he's like basically talk to her, because she'd just listen to what they're saying, saying, "No, that's not right. This is the problem. This is what they." I used to hate her for it, but I mean, she was correct, and I always remember when I bought that old Model A, and you know, we're talking a 1930s car, and I didn't have a clue about the thing really. I mean, I read a bit in books, and before I went to pick it up, because there's a photo in there of Mum sitting on the step of an old Model A AA truck.
Yeah, that's the one that Dad built the canopy on.
Yeah. Well, I had a Roadster pickup version of that. I was buying off a guy in Hastings, and Mum said, if it will start, and I said, yeah, the guy reckons it will. They have to set them to start. There's a couple of levers on the steering wheel to set the throttle and the timing and things like that. And she was just quiet. Dad wouldn't have been able to tell me anything. Mum just said, set these into these positions. One lever at 12 o'clock, one at the 1 o'clock position. She said, put a battery and fuel in and it should fire, you know. And I mean, those sort of things, those are just memories of the fact that she obviously still had the experience, and she was right. I mean, I got this thing out of this guy's backyard. We put a battery in it and fuel, and it's been sitting there for 20 years, and it fired straight up. I set it to and just things like that were it's those sort of memories of Mum, and the fact that, yeah, she did have a few clues when it came to mechanics. There's no doubt about that.
So you sort of followed in your mum's footsteps in terms of your own work?
Yeah, I sort of maybe. No, Dad was more a horse whisperer. Get her in the car, forget it, you know.
I guess one of the main things I remember about Mum is there was sort of two sides to her. On one side was the very prim and proper woman who would have shot somebody who had their phone on during a gathering, and who knew all the things, like when you went out to dinner, and when we were in the islands we'd go to formal dinners. She was hot on having cutlery set in the right way. She was hot on people doing their job. I mean, all of us guys, I'm sure, at times cringed going out shopping with Mum. You know, the shop assistant would be wrapping something up, and Mum would stand there and say something like, "You haven't done this much, have you?" And we would sort of, "No, please, Mum, don't go there." And next moment she's taking over and showing them how they should do a proper job. But by the same token, she was fiercely loyal to family. And she wouldn't put up with people dissing family. As far as she was concerned, that was her job. But it wasn't for somebody else. And there was a scoutmaster when we were in Honiara who picked Eon up by the ears one time. He used to come in and do a thing, a program there. Now this guy would have been 6 foot something and really solidly built, And I was there when Mum went and had him on, and this guy was carried in the corner. Mum, when she got going, was fearsome. You know, if you messed with her family, that was you just didn't do that.
He most probably heard what Don would be doing.
And I'm aware of stuff a bit like Gus. You know, a lot of us left home reasonably early. I didn't live at home from the age of 14, just through circumstance, apart from a short time later on when I was around 17. And so there's some stuff. There's various stages, like there was a period in the Solomons where there's just David and I there, you know, and other times where there was the 4 of us, and 2 of us, 3 of us. And I'm not sure if even some of the other guys know of 1 or 2 of the things that went on that affected Dad, that Mum had to be that sort of rock through when Dad was struggling, and really put up with an awful lot when you look back in hindsight. You know, when I sort of think back, Eon and I went over to this mission station with Mum once on Malaita, and the road even now is rough, but back then we went in this small ute. This missionary guy took us up to the top end of Malaita and then just basically dropped us off at a jungle track and said, walk that way. And we walked, Mum and Eon and I, right through the jungle across to the other side of the island. Of course, no mobile phones, no communication, all just on the understanding that when we got to the other side, there was going to be a guy with a boat waiting for us. And there's Ed Pollard with a boat, and we jump on the boat, go down the coast, and then he drops us, we stay a night there, then we go down to Ariki, which is a girls' school, and we get dropped off with all these mangroves and mud, and then sort of traipse ashore, you know. I mean, looking back, I don't know how many mothers back then from New Zealand could have sort of put up with some of that sort of stuff. And those are the sort of things that at the time you didn't think much of, but when you look back at, you know, what Mum put up with. And during the course of each 2-year stint in the Solomons, we lived in at least 3 houses. So we were constantly on the move. And there's a photo there in the swimming pool, and I think Eon and Mum sitting outside, and that was our 3rd house in 2 years. And that's if you'd have scouted. The first month we stayed in the Mandana Hotel for 4 weeks, which for us guys was just great. You know, you'd come back from school, you'd go and get a restaurant meal paid for by the British government, but for Mum living out of a suitcase in 2 rooms with 4 boys and Dad for 4 weeks. Yeah, it must have been a nightmare. So
That hotel on the Solomons, what was the name of that?
Mandana.
Mandana, yeah. Because when I went over when I was not long after I got first married, and I remember Dad went and got a rubbered Coke, and Mum smelt it on him because he, you know, she was quite anti-grog in a lot of ways, although it could be a little bit mixed because her father was Croatian, as we've said, and he was partial to the odd drop, and so it was kind of mixed because the church environment was very much no grog, but there's a little bit floated around. And I remember I'd go, Dad had this drink, and honestly, Mum went ballistic. I mean, she paid out on him like you would believe. And he just looked sheepish. I mean, he was honestly at times like just one of us. When she went after us or him, it was just exactly the same. There was no differentiation. He was like a naughty little boy, and he pretty much gets smacked for it. Yeah.
There was a little bit of differentiation, and one thing I do remember when I was young and we were living across from the Olympic pool there, Mum came home one night, she'd been out, and the floor was awash, and the bath had been run and had been left going, and it just poured over, and we were all playing ghosts with Dad. We were done up in sheets and running around. Well, Mum just went nuts, and the 5 of us guys got strapped, and then she was chasing Dad round the table, and eventually the 2 of them dissolved into laughter, and they're hugging and kissing. And we're sort of thinking, how come we get beaten? He's the guy in charge looking after us.
We're glad you're enjoying it, Chris.
But actually another thing I do remember from that house was Mum finally had enough of 3 of her sons, and that was not Eon and I. And so the other 3 were going to be sent out to a boys' home. And I will always
Thanks for bringing that up.
remember
Taken years of counselling to get over.
the 3 of them standing in the hallway like this with their bags packed, waiting, and Mum, reading the riot act, and Eon and I sort of giggling and thinking, right, we're going to have the place to ourselves. And then finally Mum sort of, and the whole thing in hindsight was probably pantomime.
It was a setup.
It was a setup. And it says, I'm going to give you one last chance.
Yes. Dad was the negotiator. I don't know what the 3 of us had done.
Harold also came round.
Did he? Yeah, that's right, he did, because Harold was going to drive us.
Harold came round to drive us to,
and Mum had our bags packed, and the 3 of us standing in the lounge. And oh yeah, sorry, Harold is Dad, our granddad, Dad's dad. So Mum had the 3 of us, our bags packed. She just said she talked more to Dad than to us, and it was, I've had enough of them. They're going to the children's home. Now, of course, there's no way she could have sent us to the children's home. You work out in hindsight. But we didn't know that. And so basically she was threatening us. It's abusive, but nowadays, but she was threatening us to the children's home. And by the end of it, we were in tears. All 3 of us. Well, I know I was.
Yeah, no, I was too.
And we were just in tears at this. And Dad was playing the good cop. So he was trying to say, well, Irene, what about? No, I've had it. They're gone. And Harold came round to drive us. And eventually Dad acted like he negotiated the peace settlement détente, and we were allowed to stay. But gosh.
What did you guys actually do?
Well, see, that's it. I can't remember.
No, we were just typical boys, Like I remember when we went, when we were doing our milk run, I remember coming home one day, and like I would have been 12, you probably would have been about 10, and we'd get up at 4 in the morning and bike and work on milk run and get home at 7:30. And this day it was freezing cold winter. I mean, it was frosty as all hell, and we were blue with cold. And Mum made us stay outside for half an hour, cleaning up the outside, the yard, and
locked the door.
Yeah, locked the door, wouldn't let us in. And I remember when we got in, we had to get into a cold bath because a hot bath was too physically traumatic, because we were literally blue with cold. So. It sounds like, so you 2 little buggers, you got off with lightly, it was me and Gus that caught most of that crap. Yeah.
I ended up from the waist down.
But I think she had 6 boys, as I said, and I think it just drove her crazy some days.
Thinking about Harold, and this is again where Mum didn't like people trying to take over a household. Granddad didn't have a TV for a while, and he lived not far from us. And on a Sunday night, there was this program on the Great War about World War I, and he would come around every Sunday night to watch it. Now, we had a really big lounge in Veronica, and he would just walk in and go, okay, kids, off to bed. And it was like this, you're dismissed. I'm not going to have you while I watch my program. So he would sit sort of down here watching the TV, and Mum would just grab us all and go, guys, just there, shh, sit quietly. And it was just that she resented Granddad walking in and ordering her kids around. So we loved it because it meant we all got to sit there and watch the TV and see the program when normally we would have gone to bed.
Speaking of Veronica Avenue, remember when Dad bought us all the boxing gloves and we would do boxing matches, and things got smashed. Cabinets that had been in Mum's family for years would get destroyed and she would just go nuts, but Dad would just ignore it all because he was teaching his boys how to box and defend themselves.
Maybe we should take a break. We have yet to move to the Irene Row.
Yes, the entrance. I come back from my wedding and
No, I'm
there's
talking about Irene
a
Row.
sister.
Yeah, Irene Row then. Yeah, who now, by the way, is known as Christine White. In case any of you have any doubts, come and see me. All right? Okay. Her name is Christine Vanessa White. Yes. However, we are going to cover the period Christine Vanessa Row because we've got to hear all the stories. Because none of us went to New Guinea. No, you're the only one that was in New Guinea. There's a whole lot of stuff there and all around that. But anyway, let's take a break for a few minutes.
Look, I've got something on both the Solomons and New Guinea, so probably to kick this off, over the last year, we've been working on a bit of a project, and this seemed an ideal time, and it involves a book, and it was a book of Mum's letters from the Solomons and from New Guinea.
Wow.
And I have a copy here for every one of our siblings that I will hand out, and I'm sure that you'll, and there's something for everyone in this. I'll show a larger copy to everyone, right? And I thank Belinda who did all the typesetting for this. But in here are Mum's letters from the Solomons to me over 2 decades, and really only over 3 to 4 years of those 2 decades. Christine, of course, gets a lot of mention and commentary on her growing up from the age of almost 0 through to, you would have been about 8 or 9, I guess, in PNG. So I've called them the Melanesian letters, and ultimately I want to give every one of you a copy, but for now, that is your copy of Mum's letters to me, although Rob, there is a letter to both you and me in there.
Oh, I'm glad that I was included.
This is great. And I've provided commentary on it. There's photos there that I think all of them have just come from the family photo album, so you should have them, but hopefully there might be some. The reason I picked that photo on the cover, which you do have, is that in 1968, or in 67, 68, Dad was working for the Public Works Department as a clerk of works, and Dad in particular got involved in a lot of civil projects in Honiara, and it was a 2-year, what I call a tour of duty. So they went over to the Solomons for initial 2 years, and at the end of those 2 years they were opening up the Honiara Technical Institute, and Dad put his hand up to be the carpentry joinery teacher at the institute, and was accepted. So when we came back in 1969 to 70, Dad was working at the institute. He continued working there 71 and 72 until they came home for Gus and Marg's wedding in
73.
In 73, yes. And so, of course, Gus and Marg get quite a bit of mention in relation to the wedding, and also the fact that, you know, some of your exclusions, Gus, get a mention.
Some of mine.
Exclusions, everyone gets a mention, we all get criticised, we all get some love. I haven't doctored them. Everything there is as written, so take it with a grain of salt.
We'll take it.
All right. Mark particularly gets a mention over his choice of girlfriends, which is caused Mum a great deal of angst, but she was of the opinion that he would come right in the end. It's all there in black and white. And so there's two segments. One is 72, 73, so their last 2 years in the Solomons. And the other one was when they went to New Guinea in 79 through to 81. And then, of course, after that, they came back to Brisbane and settled down in Brisbane. So there's a little bit of commentary in there. I would welcome any additions before I send this off to the printer for a final print copy that I will then distribute to everyone.
Obviously, I was back in Wellington living while Mum and the family were in the Solomons, and I wrote to Mum. What's that?
Dying, because you were living in Wellington.
Yeah, that was right. Yeah, living it up in Wellington. And I wrote to Mum and said, I thought I'd better let you know I'm getting married. And at that point, she didn't know I was going out with anybody or hooked up or anything. And so I got a letter back, and understand this is in the days when it was email letters that went backwards and forwards. This, I must confess, is one of the few times I ever wrote to Mum or received any reply, which is...
That gets a mention.
Yeah.
How long would it even take for a letter to get from New Zealand to there and back again?
Dolphin to New Guinea. Yeah, well, I would think it would be 10 days.
It took about a week.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. That's about a week these days.
Yeah. So I got a letter back from Mum saying, who are you marrying? Because I'd failed to mention that. So I wrote back and I said, Margaret. I got a letter back that said, Margaret who? And I wrote and said, Margaret Hunter, and she lives in Wellington, and Mum wrote a letter back and said, is she at all related to Don Hunter? Now, this is a bizarre story when you think that Marg and I came from different regions, different church backgrounds. We met in Youth for Christ events and stuff like that. And Mum says, is she related to Don Hunter? And I wrote back and said yes, and she said, then she's the one for you. And the backstory to that is when Mum was a teenager at Easter camp, she had the hots for Marg's father. How bizarre is that?
That smacks of incest, Gus.
I'm explaining the story, and Marg's father was kind of like the bachelor of the Christian scene in the Church of Christ, and he was from Wellington, and Marg's mother, and Mum was obviously up from Napier, and whenever they had Easter camps, that's when my mother would see Marg's father and go, So that's how I got permission to marry.
This gives you an insight into Mum. Dear David, your letter arrived this morning and Dad brought it straight down so we could enjoy it together. The fact that he had a call of nature was, I'm sure, quite secondary. So, your father always had the shits with you. Anyway, I had to read it while he was on the throne.
Oh, Dave, I've got to say again, that is magnificent. Thank you so much. That is a treasure.
It is, and it's a treasure only because Eon actually looked after those letters when I'm not sure how he got them, and I'd completely forgotten about them. And when I came back to PNC after 20 years,
Obviously didn't need a fire starter.
he gave those letters back to me.
Cool.
And so I've gone through. There's a couple in there from Dad. Your father, grandfather, great-grandfather was a terrible letter writer, or either just didn't have the time, would inevitably lead it to Mum, which is why. Probably why me is simply because at the time I was at uni for a lot of that period, and so they provided a lot of assistance to help me through that, and so we would generally write every fortnight backwards and forwards. It just got into a habit, and then while I was travelling around Europe, the same thing. We'd be writing backwards and forwards, and that's why there exists. And when you sit down and read this, you can actually hear Mum saying, virtually saying it. Yeah. Yeah, she very much wrote as she spoke. So I'm sure you'll all get a buzz out of this, and there'll be a lot of stuff in there you'll have completely forgotten.
Some of this cracks me up. This is about Gus and Mark's accident. I do think Godfrey has had ample time to write and let us know about it all. Unless, of course, the accident was his fault, in which case I would understand him not writing.
Like I said, you all get a Guernsey. So if
He's a slightly better correspondent than Robert.
How many of you have had accidents with your spouses?
Are you talking about
Can I just-
children?
Can I just point out that for Mark and I, our spouses were the ones driving.
Yeah. No, I took Judy Hayne to Variety for lunch one day, and I was drifting around the corner on the wrong side of the road in my ute, and he was coming the other way, but Mum, and she ran straight into me.
Yeah, I think you got that slightly wrong.
No, she could have avoided me, but
If she had swerved and got over.
if she'd sort of just turned the wheel a little bit, but she just looked up and went, and then Dad was pissed because he was taking the car to Wellington that evening, and so I had to take it back to work and fix it. But that sort of, I didn't
There is a
think-
bit of family tradition there. I got my licence and a few months later drove my grandparents to Gisborne and back in their car and rolled it down a hill. So you having accidents with them in it. Yeah, that's so 15 years old, not a good start.
I neglected to put the photo up. I put it up on the Facebook page. I didn't send it over. We've got a photo of the
that's the
Church of
those two,
Christ
it's the Davis and
camp.
John. Okay.
And Nolan was saying that it's one of Marg's relatives in the front row, and Mum's up behind him.
Yeah, well, it'll be Mark's dad.
Your dad.
Yeah. Most of us had disappeared by the time, or our connection was more random with Mum and Dad by the time you were around, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, growing up I always said I've got 5 brothers, but I always felt like an only child because all you guys had married and moved on, and it was just me and Mum and Dad, so yeah, absolutely. I think just saying that you guys were probably Mum's training ground of the daughter to come, I've got to say.
Sorry, that gets a mention too.
Probably various times, I would say. I was probably raising 5 boys and then
She thinks she's going to beat me, but I've had too much experience.
Oh, Chris, that's
Oh, don't judge me, okay, guys, when you read this. No judgment, no judgment. So, as you know, I came to be in the Row family back in '71, with Louise being the social worker at the time. I kind of don't know the moment that Dad and Mum went, hey, we need a girl, but I actually don't, I've never had that
After Robert.
conversation.
Right.
Yeah, after I was born, yeah.
After Gus.
After
me.
Gus, right, yeah,
After
right,
Mark.
okay.
And definitely after Eon. Except Mum wasn't going to take that chance again. Because the odds weren't that great.
But it was 15 years, it was 15 years on though,
13.
13, so it's kind of a, yeah, so I don't know what that, or how I came to be in the conversation, but as you know, Louise was part of the social welfare system, and probably went, hey, we've got a little girl here that might be okay with your family, and so there was March, the late March. And we were just talking about it before, I must have spent a couple of months in a
Well, I got married in May '71, you were born in March '71, I
Yeah.
came back from a honeymoon, and there you were, and I said, oh, you've replaced me already?
Yeah, so, and then we pretty much went to the Solomons after that. So I have no memory of the beautiful
I
top
have
10
memories of you
pictures.
and the Solomons when you were a baby.
Well, all I hear from you guys is nippy around my butt, and that's about it.
Yeah, and couldn't get to sleep at night because you'd stand up in your cot and scream your lungs out. So, yeah, all good.
Yeah.
You certainly impacted the family.
Right.
In a good way.
Thanks for that. So I just hear stories from you guys and Mum and Dad really. I'd be speaking pidgin English before the English language kind of thing, and my other mothers were all the housekeepers of the place, and
Yeah.
There's one.
Margaret, and, plus all the church women, they just doted, they all
Hazel
just,
was before.
but she'd come round because she was running the women's dormitories there.
So
at the Tech.
they would all basically take charge and look after you. Always, in fact, they would just gravitate to you.
And Rachel.
Right.
Rachel,
Yeah.
And I met Rachel in 2001.
Did you?
Yeah, well, I was back in the Solomons doing a project.
So we need to explain
Oh.
Rachel.
We always in the Solomons, we had both a housemaid and a gardener, pretty much. And so it was a very privileged existence, because we would, I know when I was there going to high school, I would walk out of my room in the morning, a total mess, and come back and all my clothes that had been out had been washed and ironed, and the bed had been made and
Good
stuff
thing
like
you got
that.
Mark to do that.
Yeah. So I was very quickly looking for a replacement.
It was something Mum actually struggled with initially and didn't want to take on. She sort of felt it was being sort of colonial or whatever, but some of the missionaries convinced her it was actually giving employment.
And you guys loved it.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, so I met Rachel, and she did. She remembered all the family. Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway.
Rachel sort of ran the house too, because she'd just say, if you're out of order, she'd be going, like most of them, they go, yon! It's just to pull you up on stuff you're doing, you know.
Actually, can I digress a second? Mum and Dad had been out late one night in the Solomons, and they'd come home and got into bed, I think, after midnight. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, the house girl arrived and was banging on the door, right, to be let in. And so this banging went on for a while, so the old man got out of bed, wandered down to the kitchen and opened up the door, and of course he was completely stark naked, right? Oh, Mr. Rowe! Running down the road.
You missed that bit.
That's traumatising.
Yeah.
I've already had a nudity story.
You missed most of it.
We had naked stories.
Gay too.
Involving you.
Carry on, Chris.
Follow that. So Solomons, and then we headed back to Napier, where we lived in Pariety.
Yep.
Would that be right?
Correct.
Yep, correct. Excellent. We were there for
So you were going to Green Meadows
a couple of
Primary, weren't you?
Napier Primary. Yeah, it was my first day. Yeah, there. And Nana was living with us. Nana Kovac was living with us at the time. Yeah. Then, 2-3 years later, that's when we went to Papua New Guinea.
And how old were you when?
I think I was, I don't know, it's all been the blue, 7 or 8, maybe.
Right.
So you're about the same age as Eon when he went to the Solomons for the first time, when you went to PNG. And as documented in the book, you went to the Solomons first, and from the Solomons then to west or east New Britain.
Oh, that's right.
Right? And from there, Dad got a job with the Lions Training Association up in Mount Hagen. And I mean, I've been to Mount Hagen, it's a pretty rough place, but I mean, it probably was better then.
Yeah, I think so.
In those days, it was a little bit more controlled, but even then there was still a lot of intertribal warfare and rascal gangs, which I know Mum mentions in the book, but the climate is beautiful because it's so elevated. It's a sort of non-tropical climate. And I know that they enjoyed their time there, but after 2 years they were just completely homesick. It was a tough gig for Dad, just trying to, there was low cost housing to get production, and he sort of ran into a lot of opposition, as he quite often did. So they were very, very happy to come home more, which became Brisbane, of course.
A bit louder, I can't hear.
Sorry.
And I'm interested.
Yeah, I'm getting a cold. This is.
Can I ask Chris? Sorry. So during that time in New Guinea,
Yep.
did you get any sense of, like there was trouble and there was the rascal gangs are a big issue, have always been a big issue there. Did you get any sense of the security issues around it, or did,
Yep.
like I'm thinking about you and Mum and Dad off at work. That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so we lived in a compound which was metal and with barbed wire at the top, and that's how you existed really, because of the rascals, or that's where the locals were deemed. And it was very, when I think back now, quite protected because you were with all the other expats, of the other missionary families, or the international school. That's where I went, and so you're very kind of bubbled in kind of compounds. So, but with Mum and Dad, we ventured out. We did went to ceremonial weddings in the middle of the back blocks where no one would find us if anything happened. But there was Dad and Mum's spirit of adventure, and and I take that still today, that we were able to do that and have those opportunities.
Well, for a kid, it must have been a fascinating existence in one sense, yes. Although I know when I came back to New Zealand after 4 years in the Solomons, I felt a little lost, and sort of struggled to identify, with full-on European culture. I don't know whether you experienced that, or whether, at your age, it was a lot different.
Yeah, well, I'd actually only spent like 1 year in Napier in an actual New Zealand school. So before that was the Solomons, and then it was Papua New Guinea. So that's all I knew really.
Yeah.
Then we came back to settle in Brisbane, in an apartment in Holland Park there.
That was Australia.
Yeah. So thinking about our time with Mum, we moved around a lot, and then for different reasons we moved on again, and probably in the later times we were either with yourself, Dave and Harry at the time in Napier, or yourself, Rob and Cheryl at the time. So, and when I look back thinking, for Mum, she never kind of had a home for herself really, and because of Dad's choices and things like that, that's what it was. But I never heard her complain.
Well, fundamentally, he was a gypsy. He was never ever settled.
Yeah.
And it's kind of rubbed off in some different ways. We probably are more rooted to the places, but we overcome it by travelling a lot. Yeah.
And I wouldn't change it. I think it definitely, with all of us, we've experienced something very unique, and that we bring into our workplaces even today. With myself working at the university and speaking with people from Mount Hagen, like they're never going to find a counsellor doing that. So it's pretty amazing. So, and the Solomon Islands. So yeah.
That phrase you use, spirit of adventure. When I think about it, Mum seemed pretty comfortable. Like when we were kids living in Veronica Avenue, we would go off into the plantation down the road all day on a Saturday, and Mum would not see us. She would just assume that we would be back for dinner. She would have no idea what we were doing or where we were.
Or Holt Sawmill.
And we were up to all sorts of
And then, think about the Solomons, and we would get a tube and go up the Matanico River, right up to the waterfalls at the top.
And climb
the waterfalls and stuff like that. And there was a gorge that you just had to swim up to get there. Now, if you've ever seen the TV series The Pacific, the Spielberg series about the war in the Pacific, the battle early on in the Solomons is on a river where the Japanese get wiped out and slaughtered. Well, we would travel up that river right to its headwaters. And again, Mum would not see us. We would just go up all day and come back.
And we would come back with all sorts of old ammunition. And I remember this bloke.
A lot of it live.
Yeah. and I think I was about 17, I think. And you were there and Eon was there, and I can't remember whether you two were there or not. And we were pulling all the heads out of the bullets, and Eon went off and got a big Chinese firecracker, lit it and threw it in the middle of while we were extracting these bullets out of the shells. And like, I thought I'd died when this explosion went off. And I went up and I grabbed him to beat the crap out of him, and Mum came roaring out of the house, but when she found out what he'd done, she couldn't stop laughing. And she thought it was so funny, but I was like, I thought I'd died, you know.
She didn't on Bavaria when I was chasing people around with a mortar in my hands.
But that ability of hers to both cope with Dad's, you know, and then to allow us to.
Oh yeah.
Very different though. It was very different. I was not allowed to do that.
No.
So it was locked down with me.
I was just gonna ask Chris, like, did you, like, Irene was older, a little bit more resilient, these guys weren't around, you
Yeah.
were a girl.
Yeah.
Is the mum view you a bit different to the one they told about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, although so Dad, Granddad never touched me, so I was not disciplined by him. So Mum was the main disciplinarian and very strict, and
I can remember.
So it did change.
I can remember chasing me down the road at karate because she wanted to give me a cuff across the ears. I think I was 14. I just ducked out of the way and laughed at her and ran out of the house. So she chased me down the road, and I came back purely because I thought she was going to have another heart attack. She just wouldn't give in. She just so determined. It was like, just forget it, Mum, go home. And she just chased me down the road, Longview Road, mate. It was really embarrassing because people went past and there's my mother chasing me down the road.
she was one too. But I mean, it was the case. It was very different, and different. We were in Australia then, and I don't know. It was different.
She was always breaking up fights between us. And even when we were older, Dave and I were both married. We were working for Dad, and I don't know if you remember this, but we were out building the block wall out at Variety, and you and I got into some sort of argument, and we actually traded blows, and we must have been in our 20s, and we were, you know, scoring a few hits on each other. And she came roaring out of the kitchen and forced us apart. So, you know, it was, interesting. Yeah.
Dad wouldn't. He'd have sold tickets.
Oh no, he would have let us go. He would have congratulated the winner. We were last man standing, and Dad would have patted him on the back.
Yes, in a scrum, Dad was usually the first guy to throw a punch.
Yeah.
That was just how he played the game. Tough. Rough.
This kind of, Dad and I played rugby in the same competition in the Solomons. So I was in the high school first 15, played in the senior competition in town. So Dad played for a team in town, and I played for the high school. And the funny thing was, he was a prop, so he was, but I was in the line-out, and he just came down and marked me, and he just cleaned me out. I mean, it was just like. But anyway, the funny side of it is that Dad had a major injury where he didn't crack ribs, but he busted all the ligaments around his chest and stuff like that. And his word to me, he's lying on the ground, and we were meant to go to the Mendana Hotel for a meal. And he said, whatever you do not tell your mother this happened. I mean, he's being attended by, and he swore me to secrecy. So we all go out to the Mendana Hotel for this dinner, and we're all having steak and stuff around the pool in the Mendana. Dad collapses on his side. By which time I'm going, Mum, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I think I got
or half a chicken or a steak.
Yeah, but I got in more trouble for not telling Mum than he got for having the injury. I'm going, come on. Yeah.
Robert, sorry to address the panel. I just want you to talk about your mum and in terms of her fierce intellect. We talked about that at home before.
Her intellect.
Your mum and how bright she was.
Yeah, well, she gave us, I think Mum instilled, certainly in me, and I suspect the other guys, and Christine, a love of reading. And that's still with me today, although mostly it's on iBooks. But yeah, and she was probably the intellectual powerhouse in the family, which isn't to say Dad was dumb, far from it. I think she brought the intellect to any extent that we've got any level of brightness amongst us. I suspect that is not so much the DNA, but the way she just, gave us a sense of, and she told stories, and like I remember, being a little kid, and she would tell. The one story I always remember was the sinking of the Graf Spey, and I don't know if you guys got that one, but
Argentina.
Yeah, in Argentina, and probably my love of history came from Mum. So where she just instilled that sense of story.
And remember, they invested, and it must have been in the time quite a big investment, in a massive encyclopedia series.
They
had pride and place in our
Yeah.
living room.
Yeah.
And when I think about it now, it must have been for them because, some of you know that Dad went bankrupt when I was about 8. And Dad ended up with 3 jobs and Mum had to work because Mum was determined to pay off their debts. So when I think about that period from then on, things can't have been easy for them, but they invested in that encyclopedia series and it was there and we were encouraged to explore it.
Yeah. Dave just wanted to look at the naked statues of Greece.
I didn't say that.
And we would always sit around the family table at night, and we'd do. There'd be a passage from the Bible or something, and there'd be a great discussion. And that tradition came from Nana Clovick, Mum's mother. If you were there at her place, you'd do the same thing. And then we would do it. And I always remember this, and I hate to give you credit, Mark, but I remember. Yeah.
Let it out.
I always remember this one. You would have been about 7 or something, and we were at Veronica Avenue, and some question came up about the universe, and Mark said it's as vast as infinity, and we all went, what? Well, we didn't go what the F, because we didn't know that word then, but that's exactly the expression that we would have used now. So, but that was the kind of debate. The other thing was that Mum was a staunch Labor voter and the old man was a staunch right-wing nationalist, and that made for some extremely interesting discussions
Except
around.
that Dad always surrendered, and the dominating voice was Mum. You would never see Dad win a political debate.
No. Well, practically any debate, really.
But they'd always go out and vote no, cancelling each other's vote.
That was their whole intention. They would cancel each other's vote.
But the idea that you wouldn't go would just be total anathema.
And the kids are still conflicted. But we'd probably cancel each other's votes out.
Mum was also a bookkeeper, and really good with figures. And like. Even when
Dad was hopeless. I mean, he was the most hopeless businessman on the planet.
But she could do long addition and subtraction and multiplication, division, no trouble at all. Even when calculators came out, she'd just still be going down. And I was talking to one of the missionaries not so long ago from over in the Solomons, who said when she came, she just like totally sorted out their books and stuff that they'd been struggling with. She could just walk in and sift through it and get it sort of sorted in no time at all.
Well, the one memory I have of Mum and Nana was the fact that the two played Scrabble, and it was just ruthless. I mean, the words they would come up with and the arguments they would have, they were just one and the same person. But Nana and Mum at Scrabble, it was just A-game material. It was just stuff of legends, really. I mean, the rounds they had, and it was just Yeah, the arguments.
Oh, well, I see Valentino plays Monopoly and he's got his great-grandmother's DNA in him. It's ruthless. It's absolutely ruthless.
But there's one incident I was thinking of just before that to me typified Mum a bit for me, and that's when I was younger I was not quite the calm, peaceful person you see now. I tended to see red and fly off the handle pretty quickly. And,
Zealot was the term, mate.
what was it?
Zealot.
And I forget what it was, but I was in their bedroom and Mum, I was outraged about something and Mum just said, keep quiet and sit down. And I saw red. And I said, no, I'm right about this, and it just went off. And Mum just let me go, and at the end of it, she just looked at me and said, young man, don't you ever do that to me again. And then there was a moment where we just stood staring at each other, and then there was just this hint of a smile on her face, and it was almost like, it's wrong for you to do that, but I admire your spunk. And, you know,
No,
Mum
she
was
thought you were
funny with
shit.
that. Yeah. No, you're bringing your own self into it.
After all of that, so New Guinea, now Australia, later life, later years, you know, some of that stuff, and maybe leading up to when she died. Any reflections on, you know, on the fact that, you know, obviously the brief history before her death was being out with Dad on a building project, which was the story of her life. If you go back to those making toasted cheese on toast for the rugby team in Rotorua, through to that, catering and looking after a building team up in the back blocks of Queensland, you know, and then having the stroke. Any thoughts just around those last years of her life, and any stories or reflections? Because again, I was away from it, and I remember I had booked to fly in on Sunday of Easter because she was obviously in hospital, but she died on Good Friday. So I missed all of that, and I spoke on the phone, I remember, to Dave and to Rob in that period, just leading up to that. So I didn't know any of it. Like, I mean, when I say don't know any of it, I wasn't around for any of that kind of period and the time and what went on and her living in Brisbane, except when Marg and I occasionally came over for visits. But I'm just kind of interested in any kind of reflections in those later stages of what was a young life, really. I mean, 60, she died around the age of Rob and I.
She's a year older than me when she died. And, you know, she lived it with us at Wishart, and, you know, Matt was there, and I don't know if Matt's got any thoughts of that time, because how old would you have been then, Matt?
I would have been 12.
12, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
no, I think, she was an ever-present part of our life as grandkids, and her and Grandad took my room, and I was fine with that. So I do remember the time that Grandad woke up one morning and he couldn't find his teeth, and he, after a period of time, he found them in Grandma's pillowcase, and that kind of evoked certain thoughts about what went on that. So as a 12-year-old, given Dad's Row approach to sexual education, you know, that wasn't a good start for me. But look, I think she was what she was to everyone else. She was a firm lady. I always remember her being quite strict, even from my point of view, but she was always around, and she was, I don't know, she just felt like she was a big part of our life, and she was a great lady, really, really strong. I just remember her as being a very strong woman, and having the home brand cheesels on hand at all times. So that was also a great thing. Because if she wasn't living with us, you were living up the top of the street. you know,
that's right.
which was great too. So we were really lucky to have her and Granddad and Chris as part of our lives the way we did. So
She was incredibly proud of all her grandchildren, and it's unfortunate that she didn't get to meet all of them, but those that she did, she loved you all and was just incredibly proud and loved spending time with you. Living with Dad was a tough gig, and let's not make any bones about that. It was a tough gig, and Mum in particular was the one who really kept the family together, brought a lot of energy to it. Dad was easily distracted, loved going off on projects, and which he did a lot and often. But she was very much the same woman, but on that sort of last project when she had a stroke out in Western Queensland, it was tough after that.
We drove up through the night. Were you on that trip? Was it just the three, you and me, Dave?
it was you and Dave and Leon and me.
Oh, you were on that trip. Okay.
We're in the Magnum, weren't we? Yep, I think.
I do remember we broke every speed limit getting up there. That was a go to jail trip if we'd got caught. Yeah.
I don't think they would have caught us.
But certainly the last day, and I was saying to someone earlier, I saw her about 2 hours before she died, and she couldn't speak, and that was a huge level of frustration to her. And I remember walking out and looking back through the window, and she just was sitting on the bed with tears rolling down her face, which was probably more about the frustration of not being able to
Articulate what she was thinking.
And then I hadn't been long home, and I think you called me and said she's gone. And I remember Dad was a mess, and I know I had to. For me, I took over organising the funeral and all the rest of it because Dad certainly wasn't in enough shape to do it. And I always remember I never reacted, at the time. Never. I just accepted it was part of life. But it wasn't until I came back to Wishart after being in the Philippines, and I was standing ironing one day, and I realised that my last image of her before she went away was her ironing. And so that was like 4 or 5 years later, and I broke down while I was ironing, just thinking about her. So it was a pretty tough time. But I also remember I don't know if you remember, Brian Andrew came round because he was the pastor at Gateway, and we all sat, a number of us.
Was it still Holland Park? Or was it
Gateway.
Yeah, and we all sat around and talked about Mum much the way we're talking about her now, and it was good. It was a good sort of healthy outlet.
Very cathartic.
Sorry.
Very cathartic.
Yeah.
And Brian was actually impressed that I don't think he had ever come across something like that.
Actually, you're right about that, Dave. He did raise that a number of times.
But yeah, that was a tough day, particularly for Rob, myself, and Eon. I won't talk about it, but I've written about it.
Cool.
And then the following day,
Well, because I actually remember
Dad,
Dave, I went to Easter camp,
Yep.
knowing that she was unwell.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
you
it
were
was a bit
there.
of a call to
Down
do
south
that.
somewhere.
Yeah, and then Davey walked into the camp to come and get me, to come back home. So I remember that.
Well, you know, it's kind of appropriate, the level of emotion, because she was such a powerful woman in our lives. And I think...
She was, and she was an emotional woman, and she was tough, but it was very, anything was delivered with love, very much so. And I remember one time she actually got up me because I wasn't being emotional. She said it was okay for me to be emotional, so thanks, Mum. When I was 11, 12-ish, I figured the big thing to be a man, of course, was to smoke. Right. So I'd have the occasional puff, and one day there was no one in the house, so I lit up a cigarette and was puffing away, and the next thing I hear, Mum come home, so I run into the laundry, get rid of all the evidence, grab an apple out of the basket, and I'm biting on this apple. Of course, you know, you have no idea that, you know, I mean, anyone who doesn't smoke and walks into a place where someone smoked, it's just immediately obvious, right? And so, you know, Mum comes in, you been smoking? No. Oh, son, you know, I'm sure you've been smoking, you know, so it's all right, you know, man up, you know. Oh, yeah, all right, Mum, I had a smoke. Oh, she said, that's great, you know. She said, so, you know, can you show me how you smoke? And I said, well, I don't have any. So she said, well, here's, you know, 2 shillings, go down to the local servo, get yourself a pack of cigarettes. So I come back and she said, sit down in front of the fire, son, be a man, you know. Just light up, show me how you smoke, you know. So.
You only had to be 2 to get a packet of cigarettes then.
So I get through the first one, she says, oh, that was pretty good, you know. I liked, you know, the action, you know, so I light up another. Oh, yeah, okay. So I light up another one, you know, and off I go again. Get to the end of that. And, oh, so what do you do? You're on a roll, you know, so what about a third? So, of course, at this point, you know, smoke started coming out of my ears and I'm feeling nauseous. And I got about, you know, a third of the way into the 3rd cigarette and I was just keeling over on the floor, you know, and so without criticising me, she fixed the problem right there and then, you know.
And that piece of parental advice comes courtesy of Irene Row to all of you parents of younger children. But here's a funny story. A few years before he died, we had a get-together with all us guys and Dad, and we were driving up Mount Ruapehu, and one of the guys said, oh, well, Gus was always her favourite, and I went, no, I wasn't. And every one of them goes, yes, you bloody well were. I'm like, news to me. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think we were all special. No question about that.
Special is definitely the word.
We lick windows.
And even being a favourite, I can tell you, didn't absolve you from the possibility of being sent to a children's home.
Didn't she say once she was ready to pack her bags and go?
That was the.
No, she was going to pack her bags and go. Yeah, she did. Yeah, that was a threat to us. Yeah. And partly us boys, it didn't work because we were, and the problem is, yeah.
I used to like the way we used to, like on school holidays, we'd all hop in the ute with Dad, and there'd be 6 of us in that Holden ute, and you and Gus would be in the front, and us 3 boys would be in the back. And the old man would take that out, the Pookie Tap or Rizzing, he'd have it right off the clock. And we'd just sit in the back of the ute with the mattress down and the tornado cover up to the back window, and be looking at it and watching Dad.
He was just one of the boys.
And then he'd just say, don't tell Mum.
Don't tell your mother. Yeah. Don't tell your mother was a reasonably well-heard line in our family, whether we were sitting on the deck of our cousins drinking wine that Dad let us drink, but Mum would have been horrified about it. It was something like, whatever you do, don't tell your mother.
Although, to be fair, I think Mum knew a lot more than we did.
Of course she did.
I think, you know, it's appropriate to kind of wrap this up, but I think it's important to say Mum would have loved us. You know, if the circumstances were different, we're talking about somebody else, Mum would have loved being here because she really did love the family. You made that point. And she would have really loved watching the grandchildren or her great-grandchildren. She just would have enjoyed, and even if she'd worried that some of them were misbehaving or doing whatever, it still wouldn't, none of that would have clouded the fact that she really, that for her family, she was fierce about family. And so I think we, you know, the fact that you've all made the effort to be here, I know it can seem, it's a little bit indulgent, everybody having to sit and listen to older people and younger people, you know, be nostalgic, but Mum, in a sense, Mum's worthy of that. And I guess we kind of believe that the heritage that she was such a major part of is all part of you guys. And we hope that you kind of just enjoy or have enjoyed getting a glimpse of, a little bit bigger glimpse of this wonderful lady. Part of the reason that I was motivated about it was that I remember flying in for the funeral and then hopping on a plane and flying back. And we've never stood, you know, I mean, I know Mum was buried there and stuff, but we've never really stood at that graveside and thought, and just taken a few minutes to focus on Mum. So tomorrow is just a time where each of us, certainly the siblings, but others are perfectly free to, can just share a word of gratitude. That's all it's for. And then we'll just finish with a prayer and that'll be it. And then I want to say, Matt and Amy, thanks for the invite to your place for lunch, because that gives us, well, the wonderful thing about that is it gives us a chance to relax. And again, Mum would have loved that. She loved coming home from church. She loved going to church. It's not something she inculcated that well into us, but she loved going to church. But she loved those dinners after church. She loved when the family all went around, or went round to Nana Kovic's. And
She liked the alarm clock too.
so she loved that chance to just church. We've been to church, now let's eat together. So thanks, Matt and Amy, because I think it'll be a very appropriate time just to have that graveside and then just hang out, and also to enjoy the grandchildren with the Easter egg hunt and stuff like that. It's kind of, it's Mum. Welcome. A couple of things just for those who didn't understand the te reo yesterday. In the introduction, some of you who grew up in Hawke's Bay will have recognised words like tūtai kuri. So it's traditional when you're doing an introduction to an event like that the speaker will reference their background. And so I started by saying ko Maturuahau te Maunga, and that means Napier Hill is my mountain. And then ko Tūtai Kuri te Awa means that the river that I connect to is Tūtai Kuri, which again my siblings will remember many precious moments as a family on the banks of that river, having picnics and swimming in the river. And then so once you talk about place, you then talk about tribe, which I didn't obviously, but then about family. And so ko Row te whānau means that the Rows are my family, and then referencing Thomas as an ancestor and dad, and then ko Irene te whaia, which means Irene was my mother. And so Irene, we gather today to remember that and to honour you especially, and the impact that you had in our lives, which was, as we talked about yesterday, really significant. And this occasion is probably long overdue for us as a family to gather and take a moment for Irene. And so that's what we're going to do. Bennett and Jessica are going to just together read a brief poem, and after the poem it's just quiet and there is no order to it, but please just share your reflections, and then when I feel like we've kind of done the dash on that, I'll just pray a bit at the end. So Bennett and Jess.
Those who have died have not left us, and they are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees, in the groaning woods, and the flowing water. So listen more often to our ancestors' breath. Those who have died have not left us, and they are not under the earth. They are in the striving of their children, in the firebrand energy of their grandchildren, and the hopeful glint in their great-grandchildren's eyes.
So listen more carefully to our ancestors' breath. Those who have died have not left us, and they are not under the earth. They are in the values that guide us, in those out-of-the-blue dreams that inspire, and in the love that seeps out of our hearts. So pay attention and remember our ancestors who have never left.
Well, Mum, I'll start by saying I am grateful for the freedom that you gave most of us when we were growing up to explore, because that freedom was just an incredible gift that shaped who we were long after you had departed. So I'm thankful for that.
I'm quite grateful for Grandma, just for the fact that, for her, then we wouldn't be here today. And especially yesterday, hearing the stories and having all the siblings there together. Because my memories of Grandma are pretty distant. We didn't have a whole lot of time with her. And having those stories, and especially Dave for that book, I'm really looking forward to reading that. Just put a more, sort of human element to the memories I have. So I'm really grateful for that, and especially for the siblings. Opening your hearts and sharing those stories with us. Thank you.
I'd like to say, Mum, that I want to thank you for the impact that you had on my life. Pretty much all of it positive. I want to thank you for the love you had for all of us, and also the love you had for our grandchildren, and I speak particularly of my grandchildren. And I'm glad today that the two that you haven't met are here as well. And thank you for all that love and that and just the power of your presence. You were a formidable woman, and that's carried on in your sons and your daughter and your grandchildren. So thank you.
Yes, Mum, thank you for putting up with us. You were a remarkable woman. Your love was complete, never-ending. Family was everything to you. And you had an incredible resilience, which you had to have. As the only woman initially in a family with a husband and 5 boys. And to hold your own as a woman and to teach us values of what we probably didn't understand then, but in her own way, she was a feminist. She spanned an incredible period in history. She grew up during the Depression. She was a WAC in World War II, a mechanic, drove American generals around, lived here in Australia for a while, and came back, and despite being considerably older and I think a hell of a lot more mature, married our father and bore us and raised us with the values that we have today. Those values will never leave us, and Mum, you've never left us either. You walk with me every day, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I don't have a lot of memories of Grandma. I was obviously very young, but I always have these sort of different glimpses, and I remember that there was always puzzles that like she was doing, and she was framing them, and they were always up on the wall. And I remember Matt and I particularly being a bit older than Mandy, you know, we had a few sort of different times when we'd stay with Grandma and Granddad because Mum and Dad were sort of travelling or whatever. And I don't know, for some reason it just always sticks in my head with be scraping the bottom of the ice cream bowl, and she'd get cranky at us and be like, scraping the bowl, just say you want more, you know, and you made the slightest sound on that bowl and she was getting you more ice cream. Like, so I don't know, it's just those small things that stick with me.
Earlier, that if it rains at a funeral, it's a great sign. In Maori culture, so.
Well, similar to Bennett, I would just say that I'm really grateful for all of this, and it's not easy being a mum. It's definitely rewarding, but I can just imagine how many tough decisions she had to make to put her family first. And you know, I'm sure like any mum, she might not have always got it right, but she would have always done it out of love. So I'm really grateful that she, you know, created this Row clan, and that she instilled those family values.
I've really enjoyed this weekend so far, just because obviously I'm part of the cousins in the generation that didn't know Grandma, didn't have her in kind of any time of my life that I remember. And so for us, obviously, Don has been this very huge, powerful, influential force, and it was very obvious and clear to see the ways that he and who he was had shaped the family and the generations that have come after. But to really now better understand the other side of that coin has been really valuable to me, and kind of balance out Don's quite, you know, influential character, to see just how big of an influence Irene had on us all as well. It's been really special. So thank you to all of you for sharing the stories that you have so far this weekend.
I'm ashamed to say I knew next to nothing about Irene, and after hearing all the stories last night, you sound like an incredible woman, and I wish I could have met you.
Grateful to the little references of her that have lived on in our lives as well, you know, through all of her children. Like, I was alive before she passed, but I don't really remember her. But just little things like Grandad had some old rings of hers that he gave to her living granddaughters at the time, which unfortunately is still packed away somewhere that I couldn't find to bring with me today. But even when I travelled to Croatia, I didn't have the time or the connections to try and find the family. But when I explained the connection to my host family when I was staying in Tucepi, they kept calling me Jessica Kovici for the rest of the trip. You know, and they were so excited that I was here to, you know, find out, you know, where my grandmother's family came from, and that was really cool. Mummy, you're taken far too early. And far too early. But thank you for the years of what you brought in my life. Thank you for being my mum. When yet you didn't have to be. And you gave me the 17 years of values and of core beliefs that I will hold on today, and I'll attempt to give to my children and the people that I work with as well. So I'm so grateful. Thanks.
If I can get through this without checking it. Of course, the last few years, Mum's life didn't see her very much. And I know Gus and I were planning to come over and see her not long before she passed. And make of this what you will, whatever you personally want to believe, but as I tried to deal with it, there's been a handful of times in my life where it's almost been like I can sense God speaking. And I had this picture of Mum, and it was very vivid. And in it, God came to her and said, Irene, it's been a long, hard journey. Do you want to come home? And she said, I can't. What about Don? What about the kids? And he said, Irene, do you want to come home? And Mum said, but what about Don? What about the children? And Mum said, and he said, look, trust me, I'll look after them. Do you want to come home? And she said, yes. And I just couldn't deny her the chance to be at rest after she'd given so much. And thanks for everything.
Amazing amount of influence on us children, 5 boys and a girl, and but more so the influence you had on Dad and where you took him. I don't think he really understood how far he got and what he did, and all of us that we've achieved over the years is directly as a result of your influence. Dad really had an amazing partner, and your influence was huge on him. Actually, I think he, took an energetic lad and made a man out of him, and that's quite amazing.
Good to do this, good to be here, and everybody, thank you for making it possible. The lunch at Matt's is something that Mum would have really endorsed. That would be Mum to a T, and she would want to have been there with all the children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren, and she would have loved sitting, probably in the kitchen for some time, but sitting and just spending time with family. So let's do that in honour of her. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you there.